Let's begin by discussing the foundations of the rental agreement. This is the legal groundwork that establishes the relationship between the landlord and tenant, outlining each party's rights and responsibilities. Within this framework, we focus on leases and leasehold estates. A lease is a contract that grants the tenant the right to use and occupy property for a specified period in exchange for payment. Leasehold estates, on the other hand, refer to the tenant's interest or ownership rights in the leased property during the lease term. Understanding these concepts is crucial because they form the basis of rental agreements and define how property is leased and occupied. A lease is essentially a binding agreement between a landlord and a tenant. It grants the tenant the right to occupy or use a specific piece of real estate for a set period of time in return for regular rent payments. This contract is important because it clearly outlines who has possession of the property, the amount of rent to be paid, and the legal obligations that both parties must follow. Understanding these essentials helps prevent misunderstandings and ensures that both landlord and tenant know their rights and responsibilities throughout the lease term. Now let's dive into the key elements that make a lease valid. First, it's essential to have clearly identified parties. This means the lease must explicitly name both the landlord and the tenant who are entering into the agreement, so there's no confusion about who is responsible. Next, the lease needs a definite property description. This specifies the exact premises being leased, ensuring both parties know exactly what space or property is covered under the agreement. The third element is the lease term and rent. This part outlines the duration of the lease, the amount of rent to be paid, and the due dates for these payments. It helps set clear expectations on how long the tenant will occupy the property and how rent will be managed. Finally, mutual consent and legality are critical. The lease must have a lawful purpose, be agreed upon by both parties with a clear meeting of the minds, and be properly signed. This ensures the lease is legally enforceable and protects both the landlord and tenant. These elements form the foundation of a valid lease, providing clarity and legal security for everyone involved. Here we have the four main types of lease formats that define how rent and operating costs are shared between landlords and tenants. First, the gross lease. This is where you pay one rent amount that covers most property expenses, making it straightforward and popular in both residential and commercial settings. Next is the net lease, common in commercial spaces, where the tenant pays rent plus some or all of the operating costs, like maintenance or taxes. Third, the percentage lease, which is retail-focused, involves paying a base rent plus a percentage of your business sales, aligning rent costs with your business performance. Lastly, the estate for years, which is a time-based lease with a fixed start and end date, providing certainty about the lease term. Understanding these four formats helps in choosing the right lease structure depending on your needs and the property type. A gross lease is a type of rental agreement where the tenant pays a fixed rent amount each month. The key feature here is that the landlord is responsible for covering most of the property operating expenses, such as taxes, insurance, and maintenance. This arrangement provides the tenant with a predictable monthly cost, which can be very convenient. In this setup, the tenant doesn't have to worry about fluctuating costs related to building upkeep or other operational expenses. On the landlord's side, they take on the risk of these expenses, which is often reflected in a slightly higher rent compared to other lease types. Gross leases are commonly seen in residential rentals and some office leases, making them a popular choice when simplicity and stability in rent payments are desired. Essentially, you make one single rent payment, and the landlord handles most of the costs associated with the building. This can be a very straightforward approach for tenants who prefer not to manage additional expenses beyond rent. Let's talk about net leases, which are quite common in commercial real estate. In a net lease, the tenant not only pays the base rent, but also covers some or all of the property's operating expenses. This means more costs are shifted to the tenant compared to a gross lease. Starting with the single net lease, often called N, the tenant pays the rent plus property taxes. The landlord typically handles insurance and maintenance costs here. Next is the double net lease, or NN. In this type, the tenant is responsible for rent, property taxes, and insurance, while the landlord usually takes care of structural maintenance. Then we have the triple net lease, known as NNN, which is one of the most common formats in commercial leasing. Here, the tenant covers rent, taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs. This arrangement transfers most operating expenses to the tenant. Finally, there's the absolute net lease, which is the most comprehensive. The tenant assumes nearly all costs and risks, including major repairs and building-related obligations. This type is common in retail, office, and standalone commercial properties. Overall, net leases are especially typical in retail and commercial property sectors, offering landlords more predictable income while passing on many expenses to tenants. Here, we're looking at percentage leases, which are quite common in retail leasing. The key idea is that the tenant pays a base rent, which is a fixed minimum amount. On top of that, the tenant also pays a percentage of their sales, but only once their sales exceed a certain agreed-upon threshold. This structure balances fixed income for the landlord with potential additional earnings tied to the tenant's success. So, it's a combination of a stable base rent plus a variable amount that reflects actual sales performance. This kind of lease arrangement helps align the interests of both parties in a retail setting. Now let's talk about tenant rights, which are crucial for anyone renting a home. First, tenants have the right to quiet enjoyment of the property, meaning they should be able to live without unreasonable interference from the landlord or others. Second, the property must be safe and habitable, meeting all legal housing standards to ensure your living space is healthy and secure. Third, landlords must give proper notice before entering the property, changing rent, or terminating the lease. This gives tenants time to prepare and ensures transparency. Fourth, tenants are entitled to fair treatment under anti-discrimination and housing laws, so no one should face unfair treatment based on race, gender, or other protected categories. Lastly, the security deposit must be returned according to the lease terms and state laws, protecting tenants from unfair withholding of their money after moving out. Understanding these rights helps tenants feel confident and protected throughout their rental experience. As landlords, there are several key obligations we must fulfill to maintain a positive and lawful leasing relationship. First is delivering possession, which means providing the premises as agreed and ensuring it's ready for the tenant's lawful use from day one. Next, maintaining habitability is crucial. This involves keeping essential systems like plumbing, heating, and electrical safe, functional, and compliant with building codes, as well as maintaining common areas. We must also honor quiet enjoyment, which means avoiding any unreasonable interference with the tenant's legal right to peacefully use and occupy the property. Another important duty is making the required disclosures. This means sharing all material facts, rules, and any legally mandated notices before the tenant takes possession. Lastly, handling funds properly is essential. Landlords must collect, hold, and return security deposits in accordance with the lease terms and state law. These legal duties are foundational, shaping the entire lease relationship and ensuring respect and fairness on both sides. When we talk about tenant obligations, there are a few key responsibilities that every tenant should keep in mind. First and foremost, paying rent on time is crucial. It keeps the landlord-tenant relationship strong and avoids any potential legal issues. Next, keeping the property clean is important not just for your own comfort, but also to maintain the property's condition. Following the lease terms is another essential part of being a good tenant. This means respecting rules regarding noise, pets, and any other conditions outlined in the agreement. It's also important to report any needed repairs promptly. This helps prevent small problems from turning into big, costly ones and shows that you're actively caring for the home. Remember, good tenancy is about active care, not just occupancy. It's about maintaining the property responsibly and communicating openly with your landlord to ensure a positive rental experience. When qualifying a tenant, it's important to follow a disciplined screening process to minimize risk. First, start by reviewing the application carefully to ensure all information is complete and accurate. Next, confirm the tenant's identity to verify they are who they claim to be. After that, verify their income to make sure they have the financial means to pay rent. Then, check their credit history to assess their financial responsibility and reliability. Following this, contact their references to gather additional insights about their character and rental history. Finally, based on all this information, make an informed decision to either approve or decline the application. This step-by-step sequence, moving from documentation to decision, helps ensure you select reliable tenants and reduce potential issues down the line. Here we focus on credit and income verification, which are crucial steps in evaluating a tenant's application. First, we look at the credit score. Ideally, it should be 620 or higher to meet the target range. This helps us understand their payment history and current debt load, giving a snapshot of their financial reliability. Next, we assess the income ratio. A good rule of thumb is that the tenant's monthly income should be about 3 times the rent, ensuring they have sufficient funds to cover payments comfortably. Documentation plays a vital role as well. We require supporting evidence such as pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, and even employer contact details. These allow us to confirm that the information provided is accurate and trustworthy. Consistency is key throughout the process. It's important that all application details align with the verified records. We rely on concrete evidence, not assumptions, to confidently verify the applicant's ability to pay. By thoroughly checking credit, income, and supporting documents, we reduce risks and make informed decisions when leasing. When screening tenants, it's crucial to watch out for red flags that may indicate risk or instability. One of the most important areas to focus on is rental history, because past behavior often predicts future behavior. For example, prior evictions or a consistent pattern of late rent payments are clear warning signs you need to take seriously. Also, landlord references that don't verify information can be a signal to dig deeper. Financial warning signs are equally important. You want to be confident that the applicant has the ability to pay rent consistently. Poor credit history, a high level of debt or collections, and income that doesn't support the rent are all indicators that might suggest financial instability. Stability concerns go beyond finances. Employment gaps or a history of frequent moves could point to an inconsistent lifestyle, which might affect their reliability as a tenant. Lastly, always watch for incomplete or inconsistent information in applications, because these inconsistencies deserve a follow-up to clarify the situation before making any decisions. Keeping all these red flags in mind will help ensure you select tenants who are likely to be responsible and dependable. When approaching lease negotiation, it's important to follow a clear strategy broken down into 3 main stages. First is preparation. This involves thoroughly understanding the lease terms, setting your priorities and limits, and researching current market conditions. Being well prepared ensures you enter negotiations from a position of strength. Next comes the discussion phase. Here, you want to ask clear and direct questions to avoid any misunderstandings. Be ready to trade concessions strategically, giving up less important terms in exchange for gains where it matters most. Also, make sure to clarify every verbal promise to prevent surprises later on. Finally, in the agreement stage, it's crucial to put all final terms in writing. Take time to carefully review penalties and deadlines to avoid costly mistakes, and confirm that all parties sign and properly receive the lease documents. Following these steps systematically helps you close the deal confidently and securely. When we look at tenant priorities, affordability and predictability stand out, especially with rent. Tenants want lower monthly costs and predictable rent increases to manage their budgets more effectively. On the other hand, landlords are focused on securing higher income through rent, often including strong escalation clauses to protect their returns over time. This creates a natural trade-off and potential conflict in rent negotiations. Moving on to lease term. Tenants typically seek flexibility. They want the freedom to move, expand, or renegotiate their leases sooner if their business needs change. Landlords, however, prefer longer commitments to reduce turnover risk and ensure steady income. This difference in priorities often leads to tension when setting the lease duration. Regarding repairs, landlords generally handle major maintenance and building systems, which provides tenants some relief from unexpected costs. Conversely, tenants usually take on more upkeep and operating expenses internally. This division of responsibilities can sometimes cause disagreements during lease negotiations. When it comes to renewal and exit terms, tenants value clear options to renew and fair conditions for early termination, providing them with flexibility and peace of mind. Landlords focus on reliable occupancy and want defined remedies if tenants change their plans, ensuring stability in their property management. Despite these differences, there is a shared goal for both parties to create a fair, manageable lease that supports a successful long-term relationship. These key negotiation points, rent, lease term, repairs, and renewal or exit provisions, are where tenant and landlord priorities often intersect and must be carefully balanced to achieve mutually beneficial lease agreements. When we talk about rent and payment terms, it's crucial to be very clear and specific. First, the rent amount needs to be clearly stated as a fixed monthly obligation. This means the base rent should be spelled out clearly, and it's important to mention whether utilities, taxes, or other charges are included or separate. Next, the due date usually stays the same each month, with most leases requiring payment on the first day and defining any grace period in writing. This helps set clear expectations and avoids confusion. Late fees should also be predefined. You want to list exactly how much the fee is, when it applies, and whether additional charges will accumulate if payments continue to be late. This protects both parties by setting clear consequences. Payment methods need to be specified explicitly as well. Naming approved channels such as checks, ACH transfers, online portals, or wire transfers helps prevent disputes over whether payment was actually made. Overall, having this clarity in payment terms and rent details reduces conflict. It protects your cash flow while ensuring tenants know exactly what to expect, creating a smoother rental experience for everyone involved. When we talk about upfront protection, the security deposit plays a crucial role. Essentially, this deposit protects the landlord against any potential damage, unpaid rent, or if the tenant defaults on the lease. It's important to keep in mind that state laws significantly affect how deposits are handled. Each jurisdiction has its own rules regarding limits on deposit amounts, how they must be managed, and deadlines for their return. Another key point relates to fees. It's essential to clearly define any application fees, late fees, pet fees, or non-refundable fees before the lease is signed. Being transparent about these charges up front helps avoid confusion later on. Speaking of avoiding conflict, documenting any deductions from the deposit with itemized records is critical. This practice reduces disputes when the tenancy comes to an end. As a common baseline, many leases require a security deposit equal to 100% of 1 month's rent. Ultimately, having clear and detailed terms regarding deposits and fees right from the start is the best way to prevent conflicts and ensure a smooth rental experience. When we talk about the lease term and renewal, it's important to understand that a lease isn't just about the start and end dates. Instead, it's a timeline filled with critical deadlines that you have to track carefully. The core rule here is to start tracking early. Renewal options and notice periods can significantly impact your options well before the lease actually expires. Looking at a typical lease timeline, you have the base lease duration, often 12 months, which sets the length of occupancy and the rent structure. Then there's the renewal option, which might add another 12 months. But to take advantage of this extension, you usually have to provide written notice before the lease end date. A key piece to keep in mind is the notice window, often about 60 days before the lease ends. Missing this deadline can lead to the lease expiring automatically or result in holdover terms, which might be less favorable. So it's vital to map out 3 main points on your timeline. The start, which is when the lease kicks off and obligations begin. The decision point, when tenants must notify landlords about their intent to renew, vacate, or renegotiate. And the end date, where the initial lease term concludes. If the renewal option was properly exercised, the lease continues. If not, possession returns to the landlord unless a new agreement is reached. Keeping this timeline clear and tracking these deadlines early ensures you avoid surprises and maintain control over your leasing decisions. Now let's talk about termination and penalties in leases, which are crucial to understand. First, a lease can end under specific early termination conditions. One common way is through mutual written agreement, where both parties agree to end the lease early. Another is if there's a lease default or breach, such as unpaid rent or other violations. Lastly, some tenants have legally protected rights to exit the lease early under certain circumstances. It's important to remember that a lease can only end as the contract allows. It's not valid to just walk away because plans change. When tenants don't pay rent, landlords may charge accelerated rent, late fees, or require payment until the space is released. Security deposit claims are another key area. These funds can be used for damages, cleaning, or unpaid obligations. Many leases include notice and cure rights, meaning the tenant may have a chance to fix a default before the lease is actually terminated. If issues escalate, legal enforcement can involve eviction, collection actions, or sometimes a negotiated settlement. By including clear termination and penalty clauses, leases help reduce disputes and make enforcement more straightforward and predictable for everyone involved. When it comes to maintenance and repairs, it's essential to clearly define who is responsible for what. On one side, we have the landlord, who typically handles major structural repairs, including the roof, plumbing, HVAC systems, and any common areas. These are critical to maintaining the building's overall habitability and safety. On the other hand, tenants are generally responsible for routine cleaning, preventing minor damage, and promptly reporting any issues that arise. They also need to take care to avoid causing damage to the property. Establishing these clear repair duties in leases not only helps prevent disputes, but also ensures the property stays in good condition for everyone involved. This division of responsibility is fundamental to a smooth, respectful landlord-tenant relationship. Now, let's walk through the key steps involved in navigating the signing process for a lease. First, it's crucial to thoroughly review the final lease draft to ensure everything is accurate and as agreed upon. Next, double-check all the important details like names, dates, and the specific premises to avoid any confusion later on. Then, verify the financial components, including rent amount, security deposit, and any additional fees. After that, make sure to initial any required clauses and addenda to acknowledge and accept specific terms. Once everything is confirmed and in order, proceed to sign the lease and collect all necessary signatures from all parties involved. Finally, deliver copies of the signed lease to everyone and coordinate the move-in dates to ensure a smooth transition. These steps help protect both landlords and tenants and set clear expectations from the start. When it comes to common lease disputes, there are a few key areas to focus on to prevent issues before they start. First, payment issues often arise when there's a lack of clarity around due dates, late fees, or accepted payment methods. To avoid this, it's crucial to clearly define the timing for rent payments, any grace periods, fees, and the entire payment process in writing. Next, maintenance conflicts can be a big source of tension. These typically occur when responsibilities for repairs and expected response times are not clearly defined. To prevent this, assign specific duties for maintenance clearly and document exactly how repair requests should be handled so everyone knows what to expect. Finally, lease violations like unauthorized pets, extra occupants, subleasing, or prohibited property use can cause disputes. The best way to prevent these issues is by outlining all restrictions, inspection rights, notice requirements, and penalties clearly from the start. By addressing these common causes and putting clear rules and processes in writing, we can significantly reduce the chances of disputes and keep the landlord-tenant relationship running smoothly. When we talk about lease terms, we're really discussing the foundation of the rental agreement. These terms set the expectations and responsibilities for both the landlord and tenant. Special lease conditions are particularly important because they clarify how the property can be used, how lease transfer or assignment is handled, and outline any risks or exceptions up front, which helps prevent conflicts later on. For example, pet policies define which animals are allowed, what deposits might be required, breed restrictions, and who is responsible for any damage caused by pets. This helps avoid misunderstandings about pets living in the property. Lease assignment clauses specify whether a tenant can transfer their lease to someone else. This is crucial because it determines if and how the tenant can pass on their lease rights. Sublet clauses are closely related, setting rules about approval processes, timing, and even who remains responsible if the tenant sublets the property. It's important to know who holds liability if something goes wrong. Use restrictions limit activities in the rental unit, such as running a business, making noise, occupancy limits, property alterations, or any prohibited behavior. These help maintain the property's condition and ensure a peaceful living environment. Finally, insurance and early exit provisions may require renters to have insurance and explain conditions under which a tenant can terminate the lease early, like for military service, job relocation, or financial hardship. All these elements combined make leases clearer and more manageable, protecting both parties by setting clear, agreed-upon rules from the start. When we look at commercial and residential leases, it's important to understand that although they might share the same basic contract structure, the risks, flexibility, and legal treatments involved are quite different. Before you even start drafting the terms, comparing the deal type makes a big difference. Commercial leases tend to be more complex, often including customized clauses and detailed operating costs, reflecting the unique needs of a business. They are highly negotiable, giving both parties room to tailor agreements to their specific circumstances. These leases usually involve multi-year commitments, which means a longer-term relationship between landlord and tenant. However, legal protections for commercial leases are generally fewer, placing more responsibility on the parties to negotiate fair terms. On the other hand, residential leases are more standardized, with simpler terms designed to protect the tenant as a consumer. These leases typically last between 6 to 12 months and come with stronger statutory safeguards, ensuring tenants have certain rights and protections under the law. Negotiability is usually limited here, as the forms are mostly preset to maintain fairness and transparency. Understanding these distinctions helps you approach each lease type appropriately, ensuring that you manage the risks effectively and create agreements that serve both parties well. To keep every lease trail audit ready, it's essential to maintain clear and organized records. This not only protects both parties involved, but also makes resolving disputes, handling renewals, and ensuring compliance much simpler. Key documents to keep include the original lease and any amendments, signed agreements and disclosures, payment records and receipts, inspection reports with condition notes, written communications and notices, as well as ID screening and compliance files. By carefully documenting and retaining all these materials, you create a reliable and transparent lease history that supports smooth management and accountability. When it comes to leases, the first crucial point is that valid leases require clear and unambiguous terms. This clarity helps prevent misunderstandings down the line. Next, it's important to recognize that the way a lease is structured can shift costs and risks between the landlord and tenant, so always pay attention to those details. Another key idea is that rights and obligations apply to both parties, meaning responsibilities are shared rather than one-sided. Before you even enter negotiations, make sure to carefully screen potential tenants to ensure they'll be a good fit. Finally, never rush. Clarify every single term of the lease before you sign anything to avoid surprises later. These principles together form the foundation of effective leases.